Hey, how are you? Hello, Facebook universe. So I've never done a video like this before, but I'm going to join the party. There's a little bit of a sort of subgenre of YouTube videos out there, which are the I Quit Caffeine videos. I watched a couple of these, and then Facebook, of course, the algorithm caught wind of it, and now they want to show me all of them. And of course, I find myself watching all of them. But I've realized they're kind of like a Friday the 13th franchise movie where they're basically all about the same. Pretty much someone says, man, I was drinking too much caffeine. I was having anxiety. I was having sleep problems. I quit. Man, I felt better. Life changing. But then, just as, Jason always comes back to life at the end, and you're like, oh, I thought he was dead. Same thing happens in the anti-caffeine videos because the person always says, you know what? I've realized from this experience that quitting for 2 months means I've got this drug by the balls. Can you say by the balls on YouTube? We're going to find out. And so they think, okay, I've controlled it. I've stepped away, and I'm going to go back now and responsibly consume caffeine. I'm going to have one coffee every week or so, some tea once in a while. I'm just going to do it responsibly. And you go, oh, I know how this is going to end. Because if there were a person who had problems with caffeine in the first place, which prompted them to even want to quit, which probably the majority of people who consume caffeine, either they never really think about quitting or they never actually do it. So if you've gotten to that stage, it means if you're going to go back to caffeine, you're going to probably end up sooner or later right back where you started. You're going to have one cup of coffee. You'll realize, oh, the world didn't end. Everything's fine. And then pretty soon, eventually, you're going to be right back at it and wanting to quit again. What happens is, even though because people had the power to quit the drug for a month or two or even 6 months, they start to believe that they've gained control over caffeine, and they still don't respect its addictive properties. If you give any ground to caffeine and you go back, it's going to prove, see, I'm more powerful than you think you are, but people continuously fool themselves. Now, this is not judgmental. I'm not wagging my tongue because I'm in the same boat. I've quit caffeine a few different times and I fall off the wagon. Or is it on the wagon? Who can ever keep that straight? And I think what happens is a couple of things. First thing is it works, and that's the problem. In other words, a lot of people quit caffeine because they want to feel calm. And if you quit caffeine, give it a couple weeks, a month, a couple months, you go, man, I do feel more calm. A lot of the things that might have triggered me to be stressed or angry don't seem to my brain just kind of laughs and says, yeah, I don't think so. We're not going to get all worked up over this nonsense that you want us to get worked up against. It's like your body has a shield that was weakened by caffeine against stress and anxiety and anger and irritability. But that very quality sometimes I think leads people to go back to drinking caffeine because part of that, hey, nothing to really worry about, life is fine attitude triggers you to say, well, and in keeping with that, if I just have a cup of coffee right now, is that really going to be so bad? Or I'll just have a cup of green tea. What's the big deal? And then you're right back where you started again, probably eventually. The second thing I think is that even though this is going to sound like a contradiction of what I just said, but it works when you quit caffeine, but it doesn't work perfectly. In other words, you still might encounter a situation where you feel a little stressed or anxious. And I think a lot of people think, man, I went through all this trouble to quit caffeine, and I thought I was going to be like I was going to be like a Buddhist monk on top of like a mountain, and it was going to be like, I was going to be like Om, and it was just going to be nonstop peace and tranquility, and I was going to reach nirvana, and I don't quite feel that nirvana level of enlightenment and peace. So they blame caffeine. Well, life isn't perfect. It's not going to be a perfect solution, but nothing in life ever is, but it is a good solution. But what happens is you encounter that one stressful situation, you start thinking, maybe this doesn't make a difference. I'm just going to go back anyway. And so you end up with a drug, and then you take those factors and then you combine them with the fact that we're talking about a drug that is the most socially acceptable drug, to the point where you almost feel a little weird if you're a person that doesn't consume caffeine. humans are herd animals, peer pressure. It doesn't end after junior high. It continues your whole life. And so people, it's like, what's the big deal? And it's weird because if you think about it, if you use the analogy of someone who quit drinking and they said, I quit drinking for 6 months, man, I feel good. But I've realized, what, it's going to be different this time. So I've started to go back to just having one beer or one glass of wine, and you go, yeah, that's not going to work, because if you're an alcoholic, you're a problem drinker. The problem is you have one beer, nothing much is going to happen. The world's not going to end. You're probably going to wake up the next day feeling fine, but now you're telling your brain, see, maybe alcohol isn't as awful as I thought it was, and you're going to come running back. And so, another bit of interesting evidence about the all-pervasive addictiveness of caffeine is the patron saint of the anti-caffeine movement, so much as there is one, is Stephen Chernisky, who wrote the book Caffeine Blues, which I, of course, read myself. There's a YouTube video where he talks about caffeine, and in the end, he says, oh yeah, by the way, I drink one cup of coffee in the morning. Only one, but he's a caffeine user. Now, if you read Caffeine Blues, you will come away thinking that caffeine is the sent here by the devil himself. It is the most heinous, awful, poisonous calamity that has ever befallen the human race. So you wouldn't think that would be consistent with a guy who would be like, one cup's not going to kill you. And he ends up preaching the gospel of moderation. The problem with the gospel of moderation is, it's been said before by people wiser than me, is that abstinence is actually easier than moderation. And I would say I found that to be true in my caffeine. I've done where I drink coffee every day. I've done where I drink tea. I've done where I've been 100% off caffeine. And the problem with drinking tea is, if you were never a coffee drinker prior to that, then maybe it's not going to be an issue. But if you were a regular coffee drinker, tea seems to trigger those cravings for coffee more, I find, than if you go 100% off caffeine, because your whole body and your brain seems to be operating on a different wavelength, and those cravings are a little bit less. So preaching moderation with any drug, I think, is probably actually bad advice. If you're really serious, you think it's a bad thing in your life, get it out of your life completely. It's like if you're in a bad relationship with someone, you don't say, oh, we're breaking up, we're getting divorced, but maybe we'll hook up every Friday night and that's it. Okay, that's not going to work. That arrangement doesn't work, but that's what people do with caffeine. And the other problem, though, I think a lot of people maybe then go off and on caffeine forever. And I've been in this cycle for a few years now. And I've even told myself, you know what, I need to stop worrying about this and just go back to drinking coffee. Because for about 15 years, I drank coffee pretty much every day without major problems. Although I would, of course, deal with crashes, sometimes irritability, sometimes a little bit of anxiety. But it was manageable. But what happens when you quit caffeine, I think, and then you go back, is it's almost like you can't go home again, because all the ways it makes you feel kind of lousy, you're just more conscious of it than you maybe were before. You drink it for long enough, and all those crashes and irritability, you start thinking that's not caffeine, that's just life. But when you go off caffeine and come back, you realize, oh no, a lot of this is actually caffeine. And so it's just hard to look at it and think about it the same way again. The other thing that really ruined me in my love affair with caffeine was when I looked up a Wikipedia article on caffeine, and it said it's a natural insecticide that kills plants that have the bright idea of eating certain plants. The realization that what's really even more interesting, though, is that when you look up nicotine and its function in nature, same exact thing. It's just different plants. Some use nicotine, some use caffeine. Now, that doesn't, of course, prove that they have the same impact on the body, but it does kind of make you wonder. Now, again, mainstream studies, they all say it's fine, but then they once said cigarettes were fine. Soda used to be considered a great aid for digestion. Heroin literally was sold in a bottle, and it was sold as something that helps women with menstruation, with cramps. So here's heroin. Here's some heroin for you in the late 1800s, early 1900s. You can look that one up if you think I'm lying. But I guess the final thing I'll leave you with, this is my inspiration, because, by the way, I didn't mention this. This is day one for me trying again to get off and stay off caffeine. I'm at a point where I'm not even going to say I'm quitting. I'm just detoxing because I don't know for sure if this is going to be permanent because I've relapsed so many times. But there was a New York Times article a few years ago, and like a lot of mainstream health articles, it basically said, don't sweat it. Caffeine's great, you know, all this stuff about helps with diabetes and Parkinson's and dementia. You know, drink up your coffee, folks. It'll help you live forever. And then there were the comment sections, and like all comment sections, it's people going back and forth and fighting. All kinds of quasi pseudo-scientists commenting. Probably a lot of them are working on their GED, but hey, I'm a science expert. Everyone's an expert on the internet. So, but one woman chimed in, and to me, this was like a mic drop moment. She said, you know, I can't comment on all the science of all this that you're talking about. All I can tell you is that a year ago, I quit caffeine from all sources. And if I knew you could feel this good, I would have quit 20 years ago. And that's the thing. That's my inspiration. I've never made it to a year. You know, some people claim that it takes almost a year to get the full benefits of being off caffeine. But to me, honestly, that trumps all the science and maybe pseudoscience possibly funded by the caffeine industry. Coffee, if you've watched anti-caffeine videos, you probably know this fact. Second most valuable commodity, natural commodity in the world after oil. And as we know, there's a whole lot of gigantic propaganda machine to cast doubt on climate change, etc., because it hurts the bottom line of people who make billions off oil, and people also make billions off coffee. So there's a vested interest in saying it's good for you, drink up. Anyway, so I don't know. I don't know if I have a wrap-up point here. It's just if you're like me, you want to get off caffeine, stick with it. I'm going to try to stick with it. And most importantly, don't go back. Luke, the cave. Remember the cave. Oh, sorry. Now I'm quoting Empire Strikes Back, which means it's probably high time I end this video. Thanks for watching, and I don't know. Bye.